Hello and welcome to today's Dorset Council Local Plan webinar on the South Eastern Dorset area and the Greenbelt. Our speakers today are Steve Boyt, Senior Planning Policy Officer, Nick Cardnell, Senior Planning Policy Officer, and Millie Rose, Planning Policy Officer. I'm Councillor David Walsh, Portfolio Holder for Planning at Dorset Council and one of the 3 ward councillors for the Gillingham area. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you of a few housekeeping points that will help you get the most out of this session. The speaker's presentation will run for approximately 20-25 minutes. Following this, we will answer the questions that we have received. Any further questions will either be answered on our website or, if applicable, at a different webinar. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk and search Dorset Council Local Plan webinars for more details. If you lose connection to the session, then please try rejoining. You may want to ensure your Wi-Fi is at an optimum level by disconnecting all other devices that use Wi-Fi. Now, you might be wondering what a local plan is and why it is so important. A local plan sets out the future of Dorset until 2038. That's a 17-year timescale. It makes me think of it goes from birth to when you get your provisional driving licence. It covers a large time. It outlines a strategy for the growth Dorset needs, so housing, jobs, shops, community services such as schools are in the right places and are of the right character and quality. It also helps protect our unique environment and acts to help alleviate our impacts on the climate. To help plan for you, your children's and your grandchildren's future, we need you to get involved. Our consultation lasts until the 15th of March. It will have run for 8 weeks. That is more than a normal consultation as set out in our Statement of Community Involvement. Because we are consulting whilst in lockdown, we wanted to take as long as possible to ensure we can let as many people as possible know about the plan and have time to respond and to have their say. Unfortunately, we cannot take any longer as this would delay the adoption of the local plan, and we need to progress with the plan to help us manage development appropriately. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk/Dorset Council Local Plan for more details and tell your friends and family about the plan to enable them to have their say. Anyway, back to this webinar. This particular webinar sets out how the planning team have shaped the southeastern Dorset area. This includes areas such as Wimborne, Ferndown and Corfmullen. After this, it will then go into more detail on the Greenbelt. So I'll now hand over to Millie Rose to help us understand more about these proposals.
Hello everyone, and thank you Councillor Walsh for your introduction. Yes, my name's Amelia Rose and my job role is a Planning Policy Officer, and I'm going to be running through the overall strategy for development in the southeastern area of Dorset. So just to run through a brief agenda, we'll begin with setting out the proposed strategy for development in southeastern Dorset. We'll then move on to discuss the constraints associated with the area and what opportunities we consider there are for development. We then want to detail the proposed levels of housing and employment growth for each settlement in the southeastern Dorset area. As southeastern Dorset centred on the Greenbelt, we would like to use this opportunity to discuss this important planning constraint and the approach we've taken towards proposed development in the Greenbelt. And finally, we'll conclude with a question and answer session. So moving on, housing and economic markets strongly influence the need and demand for new homes and employment land, so it's important to understand how they operate in Dorset. Although Dorset Council has been formed from 5 former district councils and 1 county council, for practical reasons we've identified 4 functional areas which reflect housing markets and local economies across the area. These are areas where the settlements work collectively together, often centred on 1 or 2 of Dorset's larger settlements. But their boundaries, however, are not the same as the former district councils. The 4 areas are Western Dorset, which is centred on Bridport, Northern Dorset, which is comprised essentially of the settlements just off the A303, such as Sherborne, Gillingham and Shaftesbury. We've got Central Dorset, which is centred on Dorchester and Weymouth, and finally southeastern Dorset, including settlements like Wimborne and Coal Hill, Ferndown and West Parley and Corfmullen, to name a few. The settlements within each housing and economic market have different roles according to their size and function, and this helps the council to develop a settlement hierarchy. The settlement hierarchy consists of 3 tiers, with the top tier being the largest and most sustainable areas in the Dorset Council area, which I'll go into more detail on in a moment. We've sought to concentrate growth at the largest settlements in the top 2 tiers of the hierarchy, as these have the largest numbers of facilities, services and jobs. If you're interested in knowing more about the functional areas or our settlement hierarchy, please watch our distribution of development webinar on the Council's YouTube channel. So what do we mean by southeastern Dorset? The southeastern part of the Dorset Council area consists of Tier 1 settlements, including the urban fringe of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation in the Dorset Council area, which includes the urban settlements of Corfmullen and Upton. These settlements have the greatest concentrations of economic activity adjoining the conurbation, which lies mainly within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Dorset Council area, and has a large pool of jobs and services. We've then got Tier 2 settlements, including Swanage, Wareham, Westmoors, Wimborne, Minster and Coal Hill, Blandford, Ferndown and West Parley, Verwood and St Leonard's and St Ives. And there are some smaller Tier 3 settlements, including Alderholt, Wool, Sturminster Marshall and Litcham Travers. Each of these settlements have a dedicated policy section within the plan, in which proposed options for development are set out. This can be found in volume 2 of the plan, and Nick will also be covering some of the settlements in more detail later on. So moving on to constraints and considerations. Within the southeastern Dorset area, there are a lot of constraints to take into account, including the proximity of the internationally important Dorset heathlands. This is a constraint affecting many of the settlements because certain types of development are not permissible within a 400-metre buffer of the protected site. This impacts particularly those close to the large built-up area of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Other internationally important wildlife sites within the area include the whole of Poole Harbour and part of the Avon Valley. Nitrate emissions and recreational activity connected with new development have an adverse impact on the harbour. Beyond the Greenbelt, Swanage lies entirely within the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty, which also adjoins the western edge of Blandford and the southern and eastern edges of Wareham. The Cranbourne Chase and West Wiltshire Downs AONB also adjoins the northern area of Blandford and covers many settlements within the north of the council area. Fluvial flooding is an issue in many of the settlements, with coastal erosion also an issue at Swanage. And many of the settlements have a high proportion of elderly residents and suffer from a lack of affordable housing. Moving on to the strategy for development of homes, there is a need for 30,481 new homes across Dorset during the plan period, so between 2021 to 2038. This equates to around 1,793 new homes each year. You can hear more about this and further details within the housing webinar. The council has sought to allocate sites for new homes in those locations which will encourage sustainable growth, taking account of its settlement hierarchy, which ranks settlements according to their size, any services and facilities they offer, their relationship with other settlements and the availability of superfast broadband. And there's more detail about this in our development strategy webinar. There's a significant demand for new homes and jobs in southeastern Dorset. As with other functional areas, there are strong interconnections between the places where people live, work and access services and facilities. The council's strategy for meeting housing needs in southeastern Dorset is based around its settlement hierarchy. So the council's first sought to meet these needs by exploring opportunities around Tier 1 settlements, followed by Tier 2 settlements, and then finally Tier 3 settlements. In this part of Dorset, we've also taken account of the Greenbelt, and as I've mentioned, further details will be provided later on in this presentation. The council has not explored opportunities for growth around the small settlements, typically with populations of less than 500 people, as these settlements are less sustainable than those listed within the hierarchy. Any local needs in these smaller settlements can be addressed through neighbourhood plans or applications for rural exception sites, which will also need to take account of this greenbelt in this part of Dorset. So I'm now going to pass over to Nick, who's going to talk through the proposals for some key settlements within the southeastern Dorset area.
Thank you, Millie, for providing an excellent overview of the southeastern Dorset area. My name is Nick Cardinell, and I'm a Senior Planning Officer in the Community Planning team. In my part of the presentation, I'll be running through the Dorset Council Local Plan's proposed allocations in the southeastern Dorset area, before passing on to Steve, who will discuss greenbelt issues. Without going into excessive detail, the purpose of the presentation is to highlight some of the key proposals for growth in southeastern Dorset. Should you wish to find out more information, you can explore the local plan online or by using the library's click and collect service. So starting with Corfmullen. Corfmullen adjoins the western edge of the southeastern Dorset built-up area and is classified as a Tier 1 settlement. It is therefore considered a sustainable location for future development. Corfmullen is however constrained by the Dorset heathlands and the southeastern Dorset greenbelt. At Corfmullen, we are suggesting land can be released from the greenbelt for around 400 new homes. New opportunities that have been identified for development are land west of Pardees Hill, land east and west of Haywards Lane, and these are coloured orange on the map. The land south of Chapel Lane at the bottom of the map is suggested as being a good location for a strategic alternative natural green space, and they're known as SANG. In addition, land south of Blandford Road next to the petrol filling station, which is coloured purple, could act as a new local centre for the surrounding catchment. Moving on to Blandford. Blandford Forum is a Tier 2 settlement within the council settlement hierarchy, being a service centre for much of central Dorset. The town sits between the Dorset A and B and the west to the west, and Cranbourne Chase and West Wiltshire Downs A and B to the north and east. The floodplain of the River Stour runs between the two built-up areas of Blandford Forum and Blandford St Mary. An urban extension is proposed to the north-east of Blandford Forum, that's shown in orange on the map. This allocation goes beyond the proposed allocation within the Blandford Plus neighbourhood plan and would increase the site capacity to 680 dwellings and also provide 4.7 hectares of employment land, a 2-form entry primary school, a community hub and green infrastructure. Further development is proposed to the south of the town along the A350. This is again coloured orange on the map. This land is known as Ward's Drove and has capacity for approximately 220 dwellings. The 3 existing allocations in the North Dorset local plan around Blandford St Mary, they're marked green on the map and are retained. Benefits of development include an expanded town centre at Langton Road and West Street and enhanced access to the North Dorset Trailway. So for Ferndown and West Parley now. Ferndown and West Parley are classified as Tier 2 settlements. The area is constrained by the River Stour, Dorset heathlands, heritage assets and the southeastern Dorset greenbelt. We are proposing to mend greenbelt boundaries at various locations around the settlements. New opportunities include land at Dudsbury Golf Course, which we think has capacity for around 700 new homes, a new first school and community facilities, as well as land south of Angel Lane, which is located to northeast of Longham's Roundabout. This site could deliver a further 400 new homes. Both sites are shown in orange on the map. The local plan carries forward some residential sites, and these are marked in black hatch on the map, which were allocated prior to the local plan and remain undeveloped. Employment opportunities are marked on the map in maroon and include 30 hectares of employment land at Blunt's Farm. That's land next to the A31. 8.5 hectares extension to Ferndown Industrial Estate. That's land east of Cobham Road. and then 2 hectares of employment land at land west and south of Longham's roundabout. Essentially, that's the land behind the garden centre. Benefits from development include environmental enhancements to the West Parley Local Centre, access to the Stour Valley Country Park, and new strategic alternative natural green space, and improved cycle facilities to the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation. Moving now on to Wimborne, Minster and Coal Hill. The historic town of Wimborne Minster and its close neighbour Coal Hill are 2 settlements that are closely linked both physically and in terms of amenities and services. The land around settlements is constrained by a number of environmental and landscape designations, including the Cranbourne Chase and West Wiltshire Downs AONB, and the South Eastern Dorset Greenbelt, and floodplains of the River Allen and Stour. At Wimborne, Minster and Coal Hill, a series of options are proposed for release from the Greenbelt for around 500 new homes, and these are shown in orange on the map. These new proposals offer the opportunity to increase public access to the area of land between Coal Hill and Wimborne. A green wedge should be maintained to help protect the character of the 2 settlements. So these options are in addition to the new communities allocated in previous East Dorset core strategy, which are shown in green on the map. The proposed development at land south of Lye Road would deliver a sports village, country park and community building, which could be used as a youth centre. New sands and open spaces will significantly increase the provision of recreational space for residents, and development would also deliver a new local centre, allotments and primary school. Turning to Alderholt now. So Alderholt is located on the periphery of the district on the Wiltshire-Hampshire border and in close proximity to the New Forest National Park. Alderholt is relatively unconstrained and located outside of the southeastern Dorset Greenbelt. This means that there is opportunity for a level of development which could significantly alter the way the settlement functions. There are 2 alternative visions for Alderholt suggested in the plan. The first would look to deliver a small level of growth to primarily meet local needs. Alternatively, a significant level of growth could be explored over the longer term, which would transform the settlement's role and function. Transport capacity and sustainability issues, however, need to be explored further. So the smaller scale option identifies land between Ringwood Road and Hilbury Road, which could be developed for around 300 new homes. Alternatively, as a second option could be explored, that would see significant expansion of Alderholt, delivered through a series of sustainable urban extensions, reflecting garden village principles for around 3,000 new homes. This option is shown orange on the map on the next slide, and could include option 1 as the first phase of development. As well as new homes, the larger proposal would need to deliver employment and retail in a phased way in order to ensure local jobs are available and to increase the overall sustainability of the settlement. New education provision would be needed at all tiers alongside enhanced leisure and recreation provision. There's also potential for a trailway along the old railway line. There are, however, a number of issues that would need to be addressed to enable this level of growth to be delivered. Firstly, the ability of the road network to accommodate this increased traffic. And secondly, the sustainability impact of development on the Dorset heathlands, phosphate levels in the River Avon, and visitor levels in the New Forest. These issues are not just constrained to Dorset side of the county border, but will need to be tackled jointly with the New Forest District Council and Hampshire County Council. So we're looking for comments on these 2 options and would certainly welcome some feedback via the consultation. Progressing on to Litchett-Matravers now. Litchett-Matravers is a small village located within the southeastern Dorset Greenbelt and is one of the Tier 3 settlements. Dorset heathlands and Greenbelt are constraints. At Litchett Matravers, the Dorset Council Local Plan is proposing 3 new developments for release from the Greenbelt that would collectively deliver 200 new homes. These options are shown in orange on the map and include an extension to the land at Blaney's Corner and options to the east and west of Wareham Road. These options are in addition to the 3 sites to be allocated and released from the Greenbelt in the Purbeck Local Plan, which are shown in green on the map. Development would need to demonstrate that the impacts on heathlands will be mitigated and link with the existing network of walking and cycling paths. Sturminster Marshall now. Sturminster Marshall is a small village located just off the A350 between Blandford Forum and Poole. It's a Tier 3 settlement within our settlement hierarchy. The River Stour and River Winterbourne wrap around the village to the north and east. Other key constraints include the village conservation area, its location within the South Eastern Dorset Greenbelt, and potential impact and growth on the strategic road network, which is the A31. There are 3 residential options proposed for release from the Greenbelt at Sturminster Marshall, which could deliver around 425 new homes. The 3 sites are shown in orange on the map and include Springfield Farm, land south of Station Road, and Sturminster Marshall Golf Club. An extension to the Bailey Gate Industrial Estate is proposed for employment uses. Moving on now to Wool. Wool is a Tier 2 settlement within the hierarchy and is a large rural village on the Weymouth-London-Waterloo railway line. There are several constraints surrounding Wool, including Dorset heathlands, water meadows, heritage assets, and the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty to the south. There is also the potential for surface water flooding, which would be tackled through the provision of sustainable drainage measures. At Wool, residential development is proposed at land to the west of East Burton, and that's coloured orange on the map. That could deliver around 300 new homes, which would link the built-up area to Dorset Innovation Park. An additional option has been identified south of Hillside Road, which is marked in orange hatching on the map, which could deliver around 100 new homes. However, there are concerns about the rate of delivery in Wool and the capacity of the housing market. Further development is proposed at Dorset Innovation Park, which is Enterprise Zone, which is shown in maroon on the map, to increase local employment opportunities and make use of its location on the railway line. These sites are in addition to the 470 homes proposed within the Purbeck Local Plan, which are shown in black hatch on the map, which is currently passing through the later stages of examination. Finally, some other settlements. Due to time constraints, I'll run through the remaining South Eastern Dorset settlements a little bit more briefly. At Upton, 90 new homes at Policeman's Lane is retained from the Purbeck Local Plan. Development opportunities at Swanage include 115 new homes at land west of Swanage allotments, which are in addition to the 38 homes at Northbrook Road East. There are no options proposed at St Leonard's and St Ives. At Verwood, 100 new homes are proposed for release from the Greenbelt at land south of Manor Road, in addition to the 230 homes already allocated to the northwest of the settlement. No new options are identified at Wareham beyond the 209 homes being proposed through the recently submitted Wareham Neighbourhood Plan. And finally, at West Moors, the local plan is proposing 170 dwellings on land to the north of Azalea Roundabout to be released from the Greenbelt. So more information can be found on all these settlements within the South Eastern Dorset section of the local plan. I'll now pause here so I can pass on to Steve Boyt, Senior Planning Officer in the local plans team, to discuss the South Eastern Dorset Greenbelt.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you for the introductions as well. Just to repeat, I'm Steve Boyt, and I'm a Planning Policy Officer at Dorset Council My part of the presentation focuses on the South East Dorset Greenbelt, and I'm going to start off with some introductions to the Greenbelt and also a summary of the key bits of national planning policy. The general extent of greenbelts across the country is already established. The South East Dorset Greenbelt includes parts of Dorset Council and also parts of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. The Greenbelt extends around the edges of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation and covers around 36,000 hectares. This equates to approximately 360 square kilometres or 140 square miles. The majority of the South East Dorset Greenbelt falls within our area, so within Dorset Council. The main aims of all greenbelts are to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open. And the essential characteristics of greenbelts are their openness and their permanence. Greenbelt serves 5 main purposes, and these are described in national policy. They include to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, and to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging the recycling of derelict and other urban land. So moving on, national planning policies allow councils to alter greenbelt boundaries through their local plans, and that's provided certain conditions and criteria have been satisfied. Greenbelt boundaries should only be altered where exceptional circumstances are fully evidenced and justified. In accordance with national planning policy, we have explored the opportunities to meet the needs for homes and employment land in this part of Dorset on sites which do not form part of the Greenbelt. And these sites include brownfield land in built-up areas, underused land, mainly in urban areas, and that includes things like car parks and other and actually council-owned land which is no longer needed, sites in town centre locations, and other sites that are well served by public transport. After reviewing these alternatives, we found that there's not sufficient brownfield or town centre sites or sites that are well served by public transport to meet Dorset's development needs. And this broadly reflects the character of Dorset, which is a mainly rural authority. We're also talking with neighbouring councils to ascertain whether they are able to meet any of Dorset's development needs. These discussions have not yet concluded, but the need related to South Eastern Dorset mainly arises as a result of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation, and hence probably is best met as close to this area as possible to encourage more sustainable patterns of growth. As part of preparing the development strategies for South Eastern Dorset, we've explored a number of different approaches and considered the implications around providing new homes in different locations. In broad terms, these approaches include channeling the growth around the larger built-up area, but within the Greenbelt. So that's around the edges of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation. And for us, that means looking at the options around Upton and Corfmullen. Channeling growth around inset towns and villages within the Greenbelt. So that would be looking at the opportunities around some of the larger towns that my colleagues have also already run through. So places like Wimborne, Minster and Coal Hill, Ferndown and West Parley, Verwood, and in terms of villages, places like Sturmis and Marshall and Litchfield Travers. And finally, the last option is channeling growth beyond the edges of the Greenbelt. So in the South East Dorset area, Eastern Dorset area, that will be looking at the alternatives around places like Swanage, but also Blandford and places like Alderholt as well. After looking at these alternatives, we consider that the proposed allocations that we're putting forward around the higher ranking Tier 1 and Tier 2 settlements and the selected Tier 3 villages will encourage sustainable patterns of growth in this part of Dorset. We don't think that it would be sustainable to channel the homes and employment land that's needed here beyond the edges of the Greenbelt or within the other functional areas, which Millie identified earlier in the presentation. Displacing development elsewhere could encourage unsustainable patterns of travel and put pressure on services and facilities in more rural parts of Dorset. There's more information on our review of the options for providing homes and employment land in this part of Dorset in the Greenbelt background paper, which is published on the council's website. So moving on to the next slide. We consider that changes to Greenbelt boundaries can be justified for the reasons that I've just run through. But we also need to consider whether there are exceptional circumstances to release land from the Greenbelt. National planning policy does not define the term exceptional circumstances, but as part of our assessment and consideration of whether they exist in our instance, we've taken account of the nature and extent of harm to the Greenbelt that would arise from release of sites, the pressing need for new homes and employment land in Dorset, and in particular this part of southeastern Dorset, the constrained nature of southeastern Dorset, the difficulties of achieving sustainable development without releasing Greenbelt land, and the extent to which any adverse impacts arising from the release of Greenbelt could be ameliorated or reduced to their lowest practical extent. In order to assess harm arising from release of Greenbelt, Dorset Council and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council have carried out a strategic review of the Greenbelt. The review was undertaken by a consultant and it's presented in two parts. The first part looks at the contribution of all land across the Greenbelt in respect of 4 of the purposes in national planning policy, and those are the purposes that I ran through earlier in the presentation. We haven't sought to assess the contribution against the 5th purpose in national planning policy, and that's to assist in urban regeneration, because we consider that all Greenbelt land makes an equally relevant contribution around this purpose. Taking account of the contribution ratings from the first stage of the review, the second stage then goes on to assess the harm arising from the release of specific sites or areas from the Greenbelt. This second stage of the review also takes account of the impacts on adjacent Greenbelt when coming up with a final assessment of harm. We've considered the harm ratings for specific sites and areas when assessing whether they're exceptional circumstances. So there are maps in the strategic Greenbelt review which show the harm findings for the sites which we asked the consultant to assess. Harm has been rated on a 7-point scale from very low up to very high. And as with the last slide, you can find more detailed information on the methodology relating to the assessments in both the first and second stages of the review, and detailed maps in the reports that are published on the council's website. So moving on, we consider that there are exceptional circumstances for release of Greenbelt at a number of sites in this part of Dorset. And in summary, these exceptional circumstances include the pressing need for homes, the constrained nature of this part of Dorset, the limited supply of brownfield land and underused land and land which is well served by public transport, and we also consider that the release of Greenbelt land is likely to lead to more sustainable patterns of growth in this part of Dorset. We also consider that the potential to reduce harm arising from Greenbelt release is an exceptional circumstance, and that the potential to offset harm arising from the release of Greenbelt land should be treated as an exceptional circumstance with compensatory measures. And these compensatory measures include improvements to environmental quality and accessibility of the remaining Greenbelt. So moving on to the next slide, we propose to release land from the Greenbelt around the following settlements: Corfmullen, Fendown and West Parley, Wimble Minster and Coal Hill, Burwood, West Moors, Litcham Travers and Sturminster Marshall. At each of the sites around these settlements, which Nick has identified in his part of the presentation, we consider that some or all of the considerations that I've just described outweigh the specific harm arising from release of the Greenbelt. So moving on to my last slide. The Purbeck Local Plan also proposes to release land from the Greenbelt at Upton, Litcham Travers and Morden. Land for release from both plans is marked in yellow on the map. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand back to Councillor Walsh, and we're going to go through some questions.
Thank you, Amelia, Nick and Steve. I know people will now have a better understanding of the constraints and considerations for the southeastern area and the proposals for future growth, and also the aims and purposes of Greenbelt and whether there are exceptional circumstances justifying the release of such Greenbelt. So thank you. We've had plenty of questions, so if all the speakers would turn their microphones and videos on, I'll get started. Steve, where can we see the alternative development options that were considered within and beyond the edges of the Greenbelt? Please can you show the list of brownfield sites in Dorset that were considered?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walsh, for your question. The Greenbelt background paper sets out our consideration of the implications for growth within and beyond the outer edges of the Greenbelt. We've also presented our assessment of the potential to provide homes on brownfield land in built-up areas, on sites that are well served by public transport and underutilised land. Across Dorset, we propose that homes will be provided on brownfield land within existing built-up areas through allocations. And then I'll give an example, somewhere like Weymouth, there are allocations for new homes on brownfield land within existing built-up areas. And we've made an allowance for the numbers of homes we expect to be delivered in built-up areas in the future as unplanned windfall. A proportion of the homes will be, a proportion of these homes will be provided on brownfield land. There's also a detailed list of brownfield sites for homes in southeastern Dorset, also in our Greenbelt background paper. So just wrapping up really, we feel we've explored the options to provide as many homes as possible on brownfield land and considered the implications of channeling growth to different locations in southeastern Dorset. Dorset as a whole is a mainly rural county, and there are not enough brownfield sites to provide the homes that we need to meet the need over the plan period. And after reviewing the alternatives, we consider that some limited release of Greenbelt in this area will lead to sustainable patterns of growth around the conurbation, large towns and villages in this part of Dorset. So that's my response. Thank you, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Steve. Very comprehensive. And those background papers will be available for people at the www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk on the website. So thank you very much for that. Millie, long question here. What is the existing open space allocation per resident in Corfe compared with those alternative locations? Open space I'm defining as land which is potentially recreational based for such a large and densely populated area, yet demonstrating such under-provision for open space. The heathland edge of the village, I would suggest, should be discounted due to its environmentally sensitive nature and unsuitability as open play or recreational space due to its sensitivity. Millie.
Okay, thank you. So amenity green space will be delivered in accordance with the draft policy EMV8 within the draft plan, which relates to the landscape and townscape context. So the final quantities of open space that will be delivered in association with the proposed homes at Corfe haven't yet been determined, but they are likely to include a suitable alternative natural green space or a SANG, which will also mitigate the impact of the homes on the Dorset Heath habitat. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Steve. What are the updates on the delivery of the proposed secondary school in Verwood that has been planned for over 30 years but not yet delivered?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Walsh. So the draft plan that we've prepared includes a policy, and that's VER4, which allocates land for an upper school in Verwood. And at the moment, the council's education team are reviewing the level of proposed housing growth in this part of Dorset and the immediate kind of area around Verwood, basically, to determine whether there's a need for a new upper school on the allocated land. What the policy does is it gives us the opportunity to respond to proposed growth by providing a school when it's needed. So that's the response.
Thank you very much. And Nick, another long question here. The A31 is a major route in Dorset, and traffic often crawls slowly from east of Wimborne to west of Sturminster Marshall and back, passing through 4 major roundabout intersections. The developments planned north of the A31 at Sturminster Marshall can only increase traffic across the A31 from north to south and back. With many people working in the BCP area, what major road improvements can be expected before these developments occur?
Thank you, David. So in my response, I would say we're continuing to liaise with Highways England on the preparation of the Dorset Council Local Plan, and this includes ongoing discussions on any potential impacts of development on the A31. There's been detailed modelling undertaken for the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation, and this has also included areas that you refer to around Wimborne and Sturminster Marshall. So the findings from the transport evidence are being discussed with Highways England, and where any specific issues are identified, we obviously investigate further. If this involves mitigation measures such as junction improvements and/or safety improvements, the options will be thoroughly considered. And if such highways improvements are identified as an essential requirement of development, the developer would be required to contribute to the costs of the scheme. Any new development would also include the provision of transport infrastructure such as walking and cycling links, and those links could encourage residents to be less reliant on car travel for shorter journeys and hopefully reduce congestion in the local area.
Thank you very much, Nick. And once again, thank you, Amelia, Nick and Steve, for what I think was an excellent presentation. Thank you. Just a reminder, any questions we didn't get time for will be answered either at a different webinar or on our website within 2 weeks, along with a recorded presentation. Have a look at our webpage for more information on other webinars or podcasts if you're interested in other subjects. So thank you and goodbye for now.